I cannot be silent.
Back when Eisenhower was the president, golf courses is where most of his time was spent. So I never really listened to what the president said, because in general I believed that the general was politically dead. But he always seemed to know when the muscles were about to be flexed, because I remember him saying something, mumbling something about a military-industrial complex.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our home nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problem, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
Each one reach one, each one time.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.
Empowering the body, mind, and spirit. This is We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinkney.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Monday, August 18, 2014 broadcast of We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinkney. My name is Phil Restino, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this show. And we've got quite a show lined up for us all tonight. We're entitling tonight's program 9/11 Truth Now. And we have three special guests with us this month. Ted Walter, who's the director of the High Rise Safety Initiative in New York City, trying to get an investigation into World Trade Center Building 7 on the ballot in New York in November. And we also have Bob McIlvaine returning to the program with Larry and I tonight. He's been on with us in the past, and we sure do appreciate his time. Bob McIlvaine is the father of Bobby McIlvaine, who was killed in the World Trade Center towers in New York City on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And in addition to Bob McIlvaine, we have Jon Gold will be joining us in the program later on. And Jon is a longtime 9/11 truth activist and an advocate, strong advocate for the 9/11 victims' families. So we're thrilled to have Jon join us tonight as well. But first, we need to bring you all some sad news. To all the Wolf Spirit listener, that Dave Corso, the founder of the network, passed away on the 27th of July. Dave was a multi-tour combat veteran of the Vietnam War, and actually he was involved in the Black Ops, Special Ops branches of that war and the military then, and he's referred to as a first-generation super soldier and a warrior and a true wolf spirit. I'm reading now from the Wolf Spirit Radio homepage. One of the last things Dave did was to turn the station over to JP, who is kind enough to pick up the slack and do all the engineering and for us tonight. Dave so believed in the concept of this radio station that he wanted to make sure its spirit and the energy of this station went forward. So in that, this station is continuing in the spirit of its inception. In the days and weeks to come, there will be many changes to the station, scheduling, and the look of the website as well. Many of us have come together to not only honor this station, but the hosts, audiences, and certainly Dave. We are committed to bring forth the community of Wolf Spirit Radio in a renewed sense of purpose with focus and awareness. We are going forward in a way that we wish to honor Dave and his vision as well as support the community that has found its way here to this site and the hosts. We will be placing some interactive tools on the site as well as more content for information on upcoming shows, news, and informative posts. Larry might want to say a few words, but I do want to alert the audience that when Larry and I started the program in January of 2012, we were with the UnitedWeStrike.com network, and Dave at that time was doing a lot of the producing and engineering of those shows. And when United We Strike was cutting back on its programming, Dave started the Wolf Spirit Radio Network in January of 2013 and invited Larry and I to come on his network, and he gave us a slot, this slot that we've had ever since, Monday nights, the third Monday of the month, and has been really kind and generous in giving Larry and I the opportunity to broadcast once a month. And I don't know, Larry, if you had any comments you wanted to share regarding Dave Corso before we moved into tonight's program.
Yeah, I want to say I salute you, Dave, wherever you are. I salute you and all the great work you have done for so very, very many people. I miss you. There's a void in my heart. There really is. I think I'll just stop right there. I'm very pleased to have our guests tonight, and I think I'll just turn it back to you, bro.
Thank you, Larry. And I did say earlier that we would honor Dave with a moment of silence, so if you will. Thank you very much. God bless you, Dave. Okay, so, well, let's get in. Dave would want us to do this, jump into the show, and enough about him and get on with the business at hand. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a really chock-full show tonight, and our first guest is Ted Walter, and Ted is the director of the High Rise Safety Initiative in New York City. He's also directed the NYC CAN coalition network there in New York, and has been trying to get an investigation on the Building 7 in particular in New York City, and has worked closely with the 9/11 family members, Bob McIlvaine in particular. But the website that we're referring the listeners to is highrisesafetynyc.org, and that's HIGHRISESAFETYNYC.org, and that's where, if you want to click on that as we go through the show. But before we bring Ted on with us, we did get a clip from that website and the initiative, and we're hoping that JP might be able to roll it for us now. JP?
What if your office tower completely collapsed after a fire? Hard to imagine, isn't it? High-rise buildings are built to withstand raging fires without falling. They have been for decades. And yet, in the late afternoon of September 11th, 2001, this building, World Trade Center 7, collapsed to the ground
and I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. Looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
It wasn't hit by a plane and had only scattered fires burning. My name is Don Butterfield. I've been a practicing architect and engineer in New York City for close to 50 years. Many of us in the architecture and engineering community are concerned that this building could collapse the way it did. So we are supporting the High-Rise Safety Initiative, a ballot measure that would require the City of New York to investigate the collapse of this building and any future high-rise collapses. If you care that our buildings are safe to live and work in, join me in supporting the High-Rise Safety Initiative. Go to highrisesafetynyc.org to learn more for the safety of all New Yorkers.
I'd like to invite Ted Walter into the conversation. Ted, are you with us?
Hey, Phil and Larry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for joining us. Well, that clip is what folks get to play once they go to the website, High-Rise Safety Initiative website. And I was wondering, Ted, if you could, we only have you for another 20 minutes or so. I was wondering if you could maybe give a little brief background of yourself, how you got involved in this 9/11 truth and direct action that you've been involved in the past few years with the efforts such as Remember Building 7, NYC CAN, and now High-Rise Safety Initiative. Would you mind sharing a little of that information with us, please?
Absolutely. So I started really researching the events of 9/11 in the spring of 2006, and during the course of a couple months of reading everything that I could find, I came to the conclusion that the official account of 9/11 had to be false. And so I gradually got more and more involved in activism going on in New York City, and in 2008 I got involved in the New York City 9/11 ballot initiative, which had already been started prior to my involvement. And I started volunteering to gather signatures for that ballot initiative. The goal of that initiative was to establish a local commission to reinvestigate the events of 9/11 broadly. And so from volunteering to gather signatures, I eventually started managing all of the paid canvassers while collecting signatures myself. And eventually then in 2009, we founded the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now, to carry the ballot initiative forward in 2009. And Bob McIlvaine was involved in the founding of the organization, along with a handful of other 9/11 family members and first responders and survivors. And then in 2008, summer of 2009, we finished gathering signatures for that campaign, and then the city essentially prevented us from appearing on the ballot. And it's quite complicated and technical to really explain all the details, but essentially it's very difficult to get something on the ballot in New York City, and generally in New York State. The law that allows for ballot initiatives at the local level is quite restrictive, and it's very narrow the ways in which you're allowed to amend the city charter, and there are all these legal tests that you have to satisfy in order to have a valid charter amendment. And so we ended up not getting on the ballot in 2009, and the organization moved in a different direction and started from that point on really focusing on to a large extent, not exclusively, but to a large extent, the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, which I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with, many of your listeners. But fast forwarding a few years, we had some other projects, and we worked together with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. But in the past couple of years, we started discussing the idea of a new ballot initiative and taking the lessons that we learned from 2009 and applying them again, and seeing if we could draft a ballot initiative and gather enough signatures and get something, essentially overcome any legal challenge that the city might bring this time around. And that is exactly what we're in the process of doing right now. And I can go on and give a full picture of where we are at this point. But we have gathered over 100,000 signatures to date for the current high-rise safety initiative.
And you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. I did get a chance to listen to your recent interview with Andy Steele on 911freefall.com, and you also indicated that even if you have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, there's still other obstacles that you could face in trying to get this ballot initiative on the ballot. And recently, hasn't the new mayor of New York City has come out and said not going to happen, not going to get on the ballot, and then one of the city councilwomen, if I'm not mistaken, said the same thing, and they seem to be using the same old how dare you call for an investigation of 9/11? It's disrespectful to the family members. And how did you deal with that kind of flack there?
Well, as we all know, that couldn't be further from the truth. Bob McIlvaine is a member of NYC Can's board of directors, and there are many other 9/11 family members who support the high-rise safety initiative strongly. And so the idea that this is somehow insulting or offensive or hurtful to the 9/11 families is just, ludicrous. And we tried our best to send that message when a lot of media coverage sort of came about directly after Mayor de Blasio took aim at the initiative. And we feel like we actually did get some relatively balanced media coverage in New York City, in particular from the local cable news channel that is actually, it's overall a decent channel. It runs a lot of informative stories about what's happening in the city. That's New York One.
New York One.
So we really just said, you know what, the mayor and the Speaker of the City Council, Melissa Mark-Viverito, they really just are totally uninformed about who we are and what this issue is, and how absolutely straightforward and compelling the evidence is, and the need for a new investigation. And it's only a matter of time if we get on the ballot before they realize how wrong they were.
And it almost gets to the point, and Larry could probably add to this. It almost gets to the point where they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're making the case for you guys, by coming out and saying these things that really the people are getting to the point where these politicians are cartoonish, and Larry, in your past, Larry's, by the way, Ted, is a longtime activist, one of the Black Panther Party members from the original days, and has had 45 years of on-the-ground activism, and he has a lot of experience, and it's always great to be able to draw on his past experience. Larry, you've seen this kind of stuff before with politicians, where sometimes it's better that they don't say anything. What do you think is the opportunity here with this mayor and the city council making these kind of statements, and how might that affect the chances of this grassroots effort in New York City? Do you have any comments on that?
I'm going to say what we said back in the day, in the original, not to be confused with the so-called New Black Panther Party, the original Black Panther Party formed in 1966. I'm going to say what we said back in the day, and that was all power to the people. You dig? The reality is that, oh, by the way, let me stop right here and say thank you to JP. Thank you to our wonderful guests, Ted and Bob and Jon. Okay? Now, having said that, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Let me say this. Bottom line is that politicians tend more often than not to simply be pimps. P-I-M-P-S. Pimps. Pimping the pain of the people. The reality is that the 9/11 debacle and cover-up subsequent cover-up is something that should be, in fact, lauded and, in fact, pushed and supported by any quote-unquote politician who really wants the people, everyday, ordinary, black, white, brown, red, and yellow people, to know the truth. Okay? This is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about cover-up. We're talking about truth. Why is truth so important? Truth is important so that we don't make the same mistake over and over again. I believe it was Einstein who said, and we keep doing the same thing, expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. Okay? Truth is important so that we do not become insane. So, clearly, my comment is simply this, that the politicians be damned. The reality is, who we are about is the everyday, ordinary people, be they firefighters, first responders, be they civilians, the everyday, ordinary people who need to have the truth of 9/11, which, of course, has been the foundation for ongoing bloody wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what I have to say.
Well, thank you, Larry. And Ted, I wanted to ask you, what kind of support or interest do you have from the actual residents, the people in the city of New York? I know the signature gatherers have been able to gather over 100,000 signatures, which is quite impressive. But are there any politicians? People know 9/11 truth is a career ender for whatever you happen to be in, the media, but are there any politicians that are starting to see the change here, the winds of change, and get out front and pick up the torch for 9/11 truth, and also what's it been like for the feedback and the response from everyday New Yorkers that you're out there getting signatures from?
Well, I'm sorry to say that, by and large, the elected officials in New York City, as you would expect, as Larry, elaborated on, are just not going to pick up on this. They're just not going to speak out. And we know that there are at least a handful in the city council that are very educated about the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, that even do support a new investigation, but are just afraid to speak out, not even for their well-being or anything like that, just simply, because they don't want to rock the boat. So that's just, we really feel like, with the high-rise safety initiative gets on the ballot, and we do feel that there's a very strong chance of getting on the ballot still. That could start to change, when people start to hear about this initiative being on the ballot. If we're able to raise some money to run some ads, a lot of ads that show people the collapse of Building 7, that some of those politicians who are educated just might start to come out of the woodwork. And we know, from petitioning this year, from petitioning 5 years ago, that New Yorkers are actually really open to it, are very supportive. It's amazing the level of, sort of general awareness that the official account of 9/11 is not true. And, in New York City, more than anywhere else in the country, people are aware of the third building collapsing. And, a lot of them, the number of people that support the official story is actually pretty small. You'd be surprised how many people are just kind of like, yeah, I've always had questions about that. That was funny when that third building went down. I heard, the range of comments and opinions is amazing. So we know that if we get this on the ballot, we have an incredible chance to win.
Yes, and that would give the politicians that are afraid to go out on a limb, it would give them a safety net, would it not? If there's something that's okay, we've got the law, we've got the political process here dictating that we now have to deal with this, So they're showing up for it as opposed to initiating it, and I think there's a big difference there. There's that old saying, when the people lead, the leaders will follow, or something to that effect.
Right.
Yeah, Larry knows that these. Thank God Larry's here, because I butcher all these sayings every month. We're getting there. I really am impressed by how far the 9/11 truth has come, and the penetration it's making. August 1st, Ted, you're very well aware of this, that the C-SPAN morning call-in show, Washington Journal, had Richard Gage, the founder of Architects and Engineers, on for a whole segment, 40-minute segment. And that's a big deal, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I had the pleasure of watching the entire interview. And, it really does show how far we're coming, and how we're making it impossible for media outlets like C-SPAN to ignore us. That was the results, the fruit of an entire year of calling into C-SPAN, every day, almost daily, to get our message across. And they finally succumbed and had Richard Gage on the show. And it's not just happening there; it's happening in a lot of places. And we're making it impossible for this message to go away.
And to keep at it. And Larry, you've spoken in the past about the struggle and how you don't get there overnight, and it is a long haul. And with your background, Larry, back in the day with the civil rights movement and your work with the Black Panthers and everything, how do you see this 9/11 cause as compared to what happened back in the 60s and 70s with the causes that you were involved in back then?
Well, Phil, really it's one and the same. It's one and the same. Actually, I see this as very beautiful. As you mentioned the adage about, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. Because you know why they're going to follow? Because they don't have any choice. And the reality is such that I see once again the people reawakening, all right? And this is about all of us, So I'm excited, I'm thrilled, and I strongly support the initiative. I believe that it is going to go on the ballot. And I believe not only that it can win, but it will win. The more people find out about it, the more people will go, wait a minute, this makes sense. And at the very least, it should be investigated. You don't cover up an investigation. You encourage an investigation. So anyone who does not encourage a thorough, serious investigation, one has to wonder, well, why? Why? All right? So I'm excited. I'm thrilled about it. And Ted, right on with the right on, as we used to say back in the day in the original party. Right on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
And it is exciting. I share Larry's enthusiasm and hope for this effort, watching it here. And I know we've only got you for a short amount of time, Ted, but this really is an exciting time with what's been going on with 9/11 Truth, and the folks that have continued to stay with it, like our other two guests who it looks like they have joined in the Skype here. We've got Jon Gold and Bob McIlvaine. I just want to give a quick hello to them if they're linked up. John, Bob?
Yeah, I finally made it. I didn't get your message, and I finally went to the phone. And
well, welcome, Bob. I'm glad you're with us. John, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. How you guys doing? Hi, Larry.
Oh, great. Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us. Ted, going forward, there's some things that that we need to do to make try to make this effort as successful as it possibly can be. And I know with elections and things like that, where there's shenanigans going on in elections, you need poll watchers and things of that nature. Is there anything in place? Are you anticipating those kind of problems going forward? And what do you have in place to counter that, if anything?
We know that that's a major concern going forward. We don't have any plans already in place, but we know that's something that we're going to have to deal with in the next month or so and start preparing for. All of our focus right now, or much of our focus, is going towards winning the legal battle that we are entering right now with the city. And we've already started reviewing signatures that the city has challenged, and we already know that we're over the 30,000 threshold that's required to put this initiative on the ballot, which is great. The winning the legal arguments, the city has challenged a petition on a few legal grounds, and that's where we fell before. However, we're very confident that we can prevail this time. And that's where much of our focus is at this point. But we know that we've got a tremendous amount of work ahead of us as far as once this is on the ballot, making sure that the polls, that the votes are counted properly, and getting people to come out, and of course educating people about Building 7's collapse.
So there is a need, not just getting the required amount of signatures to get this on the ballot and then people go home and think the job is done. There's more to be done, and people in New York City, keep your eye on the ball, as they say, right, Ted? And it's looking like we're going to have to let you go soon, but before we do, is there a website or something that people listening tonight or on the replay later on can do to help this effort, the High Rise Safety Initiative? What can our listeners do to help?
Absolutely. Well, you can go to the highrisesafetynyc.org. That's all one word, highrisesafetynyc.org, all one word, no dashes. And learn about what's going on. If you have any friends in New York City, or if you are in New York City, we need volunteers over the next few days to come into the Board of Elections office and help us review signatures. It's actually a really easy job and a fun job, and you have basically the satisfaction of seeing that almost every signature that the city has challenged on this one specific grounds, saying that the person put in the wrong address, is actually a valid signature, and that you just see how ludicrous the city's challenge of our petition is when you're there working on it, and it's a satisfying feeling. So if you're anywhere in New York City, or if you have friends in New York City, ask them to volunteer to help us review signatures.
And that's something that's badly needed, and folks can get that information from the website as well. But I don't want to leave Bob McIlvaine and Jon Gold out of the conversation here. If they want to say a quick hello to Ted before Ted has to leave, John, Bob.
Hey Ted, this is Bob.
Hey Bob.
Sounded great. Sounded good, man.
Thanks. Thank you for everything, and this has been a great journey so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it. So,
great.
Thank you.
Hey Ted, it's John. Congratulations on the work that you've done. I wish you guys success.
Thank you, John. Truly appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you being on with us tonight, Ted, and we certainly wish you all the best, and we'll continue to keep an eye on the High Rise Safety Initiative in New York City, and thank you for all your good work over the years, and we wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Larry, for your encouraging words. Have a great day.
Well, good luck. Okay, and right now, we do have Bob tuned in with us, as well as Jon Gold, and we had Bob McIlvaine slotted here second in order, batting second, and Bob, as I mentioned earlier, is the father of Bobby McIlvaine, who was killed in the World Trade Center, actually the lobby, if I'm not mistaken, when the lobby blew up, and some of the wall itself is what ended up taking Bobby's life, according to the investigative work that Bob himself has done in trying to find out what did happen to his son that day in New York City on 9/11. And before we bring Bob on, Bob he's been featured in numerous documentaries, but there's one documentary that's entitled Zero, an investigation into 9/11. It's an Italian-made film. So naturally I had to mention that, but we got a clip from that, and I know that it's a short clip, but we're going to ask JP if he could roll that clip. It's I believe it's entitled Robert McIlvaine 2, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a parent looking for the murder of my son. And you have to be a moron to think that 19 Arabs did it. Again, my dogs know better than that. So that's very important. Put yourself in my shoes and think of your child being murdered. And you've never had an investigation. Well, how would you feel if they refused to investigate the murder of your child? And the story has to be told. Problem with Americans, it's like a big iceberg. We live at the tip of the iceberg, and we're afraid of the dark truth of our history. And it's getting worse and worse. Well, this is a real dark truth. It will pull the whole iceberg down, but then hopefully it'll rise back up. But we have to learn the truth, or this country isn't worth anything. All that history is lame. And the people should be ashamed of themselves for not seeking the truth.
Well, that about says it. That's how I feel, Bob, and I know a lot of other people that are what you call 9/11 truth activists. And Bob, we want to welcome you back to the show, and we sure do appreciate you giving us the time again. And maybe I gave you a brief introduction, but if you would, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your story, could you give a little bit of a background and on yourself and somewhat of the journey it's been for you over the past 13 years?
That could take
all night. Yeah, but brief.
No, each year it gets each year is so much different, so the story continues. But I'll try to quickly. I used to be a teacher. Bobby went. Well, let me talk about Bobby. I was a teacher. I taught history, so I've always had an interest in history. And of course, when all this happened, I just know that the way things came out, I just know it couldn't have been true because they just shoved Osama bin Laden down our throats. And that's why I've been doing this. But quickly, as far as when Bobby died, Bobby had just gotten a job at Merrill Lynch, maybe 2-3 weeks before 9/11, and he was in public relations. He was just a phenomenal writer. That's what he wanted to be in life, was to be a writer. And they just liked him so much. He had worked at Burst & Marsalis, and his only client was Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch just liked him so much they hired him into the media relations. And I know he wouldn't have stayed there because, he was working on a couple of novels. His real mentor in Princeton was Toni Morrison, and he really wanted to, he just enveloped her writing. And that's sort of the style he wanted to write, in his fiction. And so anyway, he had started the job, and of course 9/11, we didn't hear anything, but we thought he was okay because he worked at Merrill Lynch, which is across West Street from the North Tower. But we didn't hear anything. And so we immediately went up to New York City on Tuesday, or Wednesday, the 12th. And to make a long story short, we did find Bobby. He was found that week with the help of the police. Even Rudy Giuliani gave us tremendous help in finding him, and we took him home that Friday and buried him on a week after, which was the 18th. We took home a full body, not a full body, but we took home a body, and we were able to bury him. And of course, for 9/11 people, this was very unusual, and we really feel fortunate that have a great site to go to, which of course most people do. But on that morning, now I have a letter from someone who worked at Merrill Lynch right in front of me, who just a year ago finally wrote me a letter, and then I did call him, but he had worked at Merrill Lynch, and I always talk, since we're talking about Building 7, and of course, if you look at it, obviously that is controlled demolition, but if you get that involved in 9/11, and if you believe that, then certainly we have to look at Building 1 and Building 2, that these buildings were pulverized. You can't call it a controlled demolition, but they were pulverized. There's not, I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I took Bobby's body home that week, but I never talked to the doctors about what happened to him. People would venture to guess that he made it up to the 106th floor, got down or whatever, or jumped, or we really didn't know. But I finally got the guts to go up to see the medical examiner, and we sat and talked, and he gave me all the information on Bobby. They did an autopsy on him that week, and I really never connected the dots of exactly what happened to him, but he never did go to the 106th floor. And from all this, and because of his injuries, and it's very important for me to do this because I can sort of divorce myself from the other 9/11 family members because I know exactly how Bobby died. And in this letter from someone from Merrill Lynch, he was an employee of Merrill Lynch. I'm reading from the letter. My office was on 222 Broadway near the World Trade Center. On that morning, I had just left the subway at Fulton and was on my way to the meeting at the World Financial Center. So he was probably going to the meeting that Bobby was going to go to on the 106th floor. Going between the two towers, I stopped for breakfast on Fulton, and if I hadn't, I'd probably be dead by now. The first explosion blew out the backside of WC1. Now, of course, the west side was the front entrance, so this is the backside that we're talking. I don't know if people have ever been up in New York City, but the first explosion blew out the backside of World Trade Center 1 and scattered debris across a wide area. I also felt the heat from the second explosion. Okay, and then I started Philadelphia, our New York City Police Department showed up. So I got a chance to talk to this man. And the main thing is, he probably, Bobby, if he would have stopped at the same place for breakfast on Fulton Street, Bobby had taken a subway from 96th Street. He lived up 92nd Street. He lived between 1st and 2nd. And he took the subway down, and he got off at Fulton. So if Bobby would have stopped at Fulton, at the breakfast place, he would have survived. Well, this Merrill Lynch fellow called me finally because he heard my story and he read my story. Of course, he didn't know Bobby. He didn't see Bobby. But this is not only from this, but what happened, I don't even think Bobby got into the lobby because of his injuries, and some of the injuries were, severe lacerations of the chest. So it seems like glass had hit him frontal, and it hit him right in the face, and he died instantly. So we never heard from Bobby, and then he was one of the first bodies picked up. So I think he had walked into the tower, he was starting to walk into the towers when it blew. Now, an important piece of this is the 9/11 Commission report. The only thing they ever talk about, they do not talk about explosions. They're afraid to talk about explosions. They say all this damage from the planes was caused by fireballs or a fireball. And I don't want to get into the great detail or long detail of that, but there is no power. It's like trying to compare Usain Bolt to Superman in a 100-yard dash. Superman, if at the end of the 100-yard dash he blow through a wall, Usain Bolt, so there's just no comparison. I know it's a simple comparison, but a detonation and a deflagration, which is a fireball, cannot create that kind of damage that was in the lobby and in the basement. And the fact that Bobby was killed instantly, it's almost like comparing it. Someone was standing there with a shotgun aiming for his chest and his head, and he didn't know a thing happened. And the important thing is, though, he had post-mortem burns, and they were very slight burns. So that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that a fireball hit him. He was hit from a blast, and he died instantly. And he was one of the first bodies found. He was taken immediately to the morgue. We were up at the morgue on the 13th. We found him. I didn't view him. I didn't have the guts to view him. I feel very bad that I didn't, but in a way, I don't know. I just, because, the injuries are so bad, I don't know if I would have been able to view him, but, I have outlined. Excuse me. I do have an outline of his, of his injuries. And it's, it's very difficult. It's, I think about it every day of my life. And that's what makes me so angry because, if people want to debate this idea that, well, there's no way in the world that, the United States would have even thought about doing this. And it's very difficult to get this out to people. And that's why I emphasize the fact that Bobby died of an explosion that practically blew him apart, but he still had a fight. It's almost like Bobby was, in his death, is an eyewitness to what happened. And there's no two ifs and buts about it. And the fact that he was not burnt, he had minor burns from the heat, of course, that follows. And a detonation, you have a big blast, and then it's followed by heat. A lot of people in the lobby, they were burned up. There was a big pile of bodies in the lobby. And I hate to be so graphic in this, but it's so important because this is how people die. You had people cut in half. You had people's tongues that were blown out. I mean, all you have to do is just read the accounts of the people that were there. I mean, I thought, well over 100, I don't know how many people, but the direct accounts from the firemen, EMT workers, and the policemen that were, went into the lobby after all this happened. And of course, there were so many accounts of major explosions in the basement. But my account is so much important to me because I know he died from an explosion. He didn't die from a fireball because a fireball immediately just burns you up. I mean, it has power. 7 initiative. If you look at that and you say, well, Jesus, obviously, Gerardo, when I was on the Gerardo show with Tony Zambodi, at the end of the show, he says, of course this was a demolition. Who wouldn't think it was a demolition? I met Huckabee after the show. He said, of course that was a demolition. Now here you supposedly two right-wing zealots that are saying to me personally, of course that was a demolition. But of course that doesn't go anywhere. But if you look at it and you're logic about it, then you say, of course it was a demolition. Well, if that was demolished, then of course you have to look at the other two towers. And then you start to have to look at everything. And that's where the fear is, people. People don't want to believe. They don't want to get that involved because if you do get involved, you're going to realize the United States and the forces around the world, whatever it might be, initiated this to create the horrible war on terror that we, have now. And it's, from that, millions and millions of people are going to continue to die. So that's basically my story.
Well, we thank you again for sharing it with our audience, Bob. And you made a good point, something that stuck in my mind when you said it, that the accounts of your son's death, the details you were able to uncover to try to piece together his death, turned out to be a witness, a testimony, and he lives on in that respect in my mind, right then and there. And you mentioned also the people. It really is on us to grab this thing and deal with it. You said that in the clip. The American people should be ashamed of themselves for not pursuing the truth on this. And we were talking about politicians earlier with Ted Walter, and Larry is always good on quotes. He writes a column, as many of our listeners know, for IntrepidReport.com, and usually in his pieces he starts off with a couple of famous quotes from somebody that apply to the piece that he's dealing with. But here's one from Abraham Lincoln I am a firm believer in the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts. And that's been a job, and we're here tonight as part of that job. We also have Jon Gold is a real special activist that took up the cause here for the family members. You just heard Bob McIlvaine as a father relate his heartache and search for the truth and justice. And Jon is a fellow who found out about 9/11 and heard the victims' families' testimony and saw their struggles and took up the cause, and he's been a tremendous advocate for the 9/11 victims' families for many, many years now. And before we introduce Jon to the audience, I wanted to ask JP if he could roll that last clip we have. Again, it's from the documentary Zero, an investigation into 9/11. JP, would you have that clip for us?
Specifically me as a parent, I have an obligation to find out who murdered my son. The commission gave me nothing. 9/11 commission was not an investigation.
Remember, the entire bin Laden family was on one of the planes later. They'd been collected from all over the United States, and they were whisked out of the country with the speed of light while the Pentagon was still burning.
So they asked Mueller, who authorized these people to leave the country? Well, someone in the State Department. Well, can you tell us who? He said, well, I don't recall. I don't recall. Another instance, General Myers. This is later on in the commission. They asked about Moussaoui. Do you recall getting any information concerning Moussaoui? His answer was, I don't recall. I don't recall. I don't recall. Ashcroft, Attorney General. Picard was the FBI head during the summer. He had testified that they had all these warnings, 71 different warnings about something happening this summer. And Ashcroft sat there and lied. He said, I didn't know these things. I didn't know these warnings. We were paying attention to terrorism.
No warning signs that I'm aware of.
Anybody.
And I don't think the
could
prior
have
government
predicted.
could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
These people lied, and our government protected them. It was obvious they were lying. These people that people were testifying should have gone. Mueller should be in jail. Ashcroft should be in jail. Condoleezza Rice should be in jail.
Yes, and this is what came out of the 9/11 commission hearings that Bob and other family members attended, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, Jon Gold, but this is really when you took to heart their struggle and the injustice and really picked up the torch. But I wanted to first welcome you onto the program with us, Jon Gold, and are you with us?
Yeah, hi Phil, how you doing?
Good, thank you, Jon. Jon Gold is a longtime 9/11 truth advocate and activist and advocate for 9/11 victims' families, as we've just described. And he also has a book out called 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability, which does tell his story, and it's available online. Again, the title of that is 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability, and that's by Jon Gold. And Jon, welcome to the program, and I was hoping that you might be able to tell our audience how you got involved in this fight, and to start with, and then we'll probably have to break at the top of the hour and come back together with you and Bob. But could you do that for us now?
Sure. Well, as you guys pointed out, after 9/11, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings, that nobody had any idea that this was going to happen. And I unfortunately, I watched Fox News because they were the red, whitest, and bluest, and I was patriotic, and I wanted revenge and all that stuff. Then in January of 2002, Bush and Cheney went to Tom Daschle and asked him not to investigate the attacks at all. The way CNN reported it was that they asked him to, quote, limit the scope of the investigations. But as we found out later from Tom Daschle, they asked him not to investigate the attacks at all. So when I saw that, I thought to myself, why would the president and vice president of all people not want to know exactly how and why this happened so as to make sure it could never happen again? And I was still part of what Dr. Michael Parenti calls the patriotic binge at that point, but I started to pay closer attention to news regarding 9/11. And then in May of 2002, something called the August 6th PDB, Presidential Daily Briefing, was leaked. And this talked about people photographing buildings within New York. It talked about hijackings or other types of attacks. And it was actually called Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S. So, as I said, we were told repeatedly by not only the politicians, but the media pundits who like to repeat what they say, that there were no warnings. So once I found out that we were lied to, because this was a warning, and by the way, it was one of too many to mention. Once I found out that we were being lied to, I was off to the races. And then on June 11th, 2002, there was a rally held by the families in Washington, D.C. for a independent commission to look into 9/11, because the Joint Congressional Inquiry, which was going on at the time, was limited in scope. It was only looking at the intelligence agencies, and the families wanted a full investigation. So they had a rally. And I did a lot of research in the beginning. I started looking into this very much so on my own. In my book, I write about how I never actually heard of the 9/11 Truth Movement until June 2004. But that's essentially how I got into this. And, you know, when you watch Kristen Brottweiser testify about many things, but ultimately wanting this to never happen again, and those are her own words. I mean, you know, how can you not support the family members? It's absurd to me to even think of not supporting the family members. And I'm going to quickly say something about Bob McIlvaine to give you an idea of the type of person this man is. I broke my back about a little over a year ago, and I really don't want to get into that, but I spent about 6 months in different nursing homes. And Bob McIlvaine came to visit me at least once a week in each of the nursing homes that I was at. And since that time, you know, we've been meeting for breakfast every Wednesday. And this is the kind of person he is. I've known him for years. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and he deserves real justice and real truth for what happened to his father, as all of the family members do, the 2,976 who lost someone that day. They all deserve better. The people of the world deserve better than what we've got as far as investigations go and so forth. But that's the type of person that Bob is, and I love him to death. Anyway.
And for you, just a regular guy who was paying attention to the news, and then something didn't click. You started to notice these anomalies, and not just, you said, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't add up. This isn't what they said. And you had that responsibility within you, that feeling of responsibility to get involved. And God bless you, John, for doing so. When did this commission finally come to be? I know that you mentioned one of the women that were the widowed housewives that came to be known as the Jersey Girls. When was this about, and how was your involvement with them developed?
Well, I honestly can't say that I helped the Jersey Girls form the 9/11 Commission. I first heard of Bob McIlvaine on September 9th, 2004. There were something called the 9/11 omission hearings that were held in New York City. They were chaired by then former Rep. Cynthia McKinney. She later re-won her seat. But that was the first time I'd heard of Bob McIlvaine. I actually didn't meet Bob until sometime in 2006. We were trying to get then Representative Kurt Weldon to look at some information, and so we had a dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and Bob was there, I was there, someone else was there, and that's how I had met Bob, and that was actually the first time I interviewed Bob. But with regards to the 9/11 Commission, it was signed into law, I believe, 441 days after the 9/11 attacks occurred. And at the time, Bush wanted Henry Kissinger to be the chairman of the 9/11 Commission. And
sorry,
as we all know, Henry has sort of a history. And so anyway, Kristen Brotweiser, one of the Jersey Girls, she lost her husband Ronald on 9/11. She did some research into Henry Kissinger, and the families requested a meeting with Kissinger at his offices in New York. And Lori Van Auken, another Jersey girl, asked Kissinger about his business relationships with the Saudis and the Bin Ladens in general, and the name of Bin Laden. And he apparently squirmed around in his chair, and he didn't want to answer the question. And then, not long after that meeting, he resigned. Mm-hmm. Then they put someone in by the name of Thomas Keene as the chairman, who I think it was written a long time ago by someone. It says, quote, "who will be easily controlled by the administration." And they wanted to get someone else, I forget his name, as the co-chair, but they eventually ended up with Lee Hamilton. And Lee Hamilton, he's a longtime friend of Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. He was the co-chair of two inquiries that resulted in cover-ups, the Iran-Contra Affair Inquiry and the October Surprise Inquiry. Neither of those individuals should have been anywhere near the 9/11 Commission. Now, I want to mention something. In the first few minutes, you played a clip of Bob from Zero, and in that recording, Bob said that there wasn't an investigation. And while I agree that there wasn't a real investigation, or that a real investigation has never transpired, the fact is we've had the Joint Congressional Inquiry, we've had several Inspector General's reports, we've had the 9/11 Commission, and each of them had their own version of compromise and corruption. But unfortunately, our politicians and our media have them to point to, so as to say that we did have an investigation. So I approached 9/11 in a very different way than most advocates for 9/11 justice. I don't proclaim to know what happened that day or who was ultimately responsible. I look at 9/11 as a crime, not an act of war, but as a crime. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. I believe elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11. but there's an old expression: it's not the crime that gets you; it's the cover-up. And as I said, the investigations we got each had their own version of corruption and compromise, especially the 9/11 Commission. So that's what I like to focus on a lot. You know, a lot of people, many people have heard of World Trade Center 7, but not many people have heard of someone by the name of Philip Zelikow. If you want, I could talk a little bit about him, or give Bob a few seconds to talk. I don't know what you want to do.
Well, this is the fella, Philip Zelikow, a neocon, tied in with the Project for the New American Century, I think. You would know more. But they basically had the whole war on terror written out before 9/11, and all they needed was their new Pearl Harbor to kick it off. But that's what my take on it. Maybe you can tell us a little more about Philip Zelikow and the so-called commission, and was it rigged from the beginning? John, please.
Phil Zelikow actually was not a member of the PNAC, but he was a member of something called the Aspen Strategy Group. He was the director in the early 90s, and as it turns out, there are many individuals who were members of the Aspen Strategy Group. I think Paul Wolfowitz was somebody, but somebody very interesting, Prince Bandar, was also a member of the Aspen Strategy Group, and money from the Bandar family found its way to two of the alleged hijackers in San Diego. So that's a major conflict of interest. But Phil Zelikow, he worked for actually the Bush Quail campaign years ago. Here's what Paul Sperry explained about him. Quote, that though he has no vote, Zelikow arguably has more sway than any member, including the chairman. Zelikow picks the areas of investigation, the briefing materials, the topics of hearings, the witnesses, and the lines of questioning for witnesses. In effect, he sets the agenda and runs the investigation, end quote. That was his role with regards to the 9/11 Commission. Now, throughout the 90s, he wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice called Germany Unified and Europe Transformed, a Study in Statecraft. While he was at Harvard, he worked with Ernest May and Richard Newstead on the use and misuse of history in policy making. In 1997, Zelikow and Ernest May wrote a book about the John F. Kennedy assassination that was, quote, riddled with errors. The individual, I can't remember his name, but the person who was in charge of the Kennedy archives came out and spoke at how horrid this book was. Zelikow, he wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used by the Bush administration for the war in Iraq. He tried to prevent 9/11 Commission staffers from talking to 9/11 commissioners. He tried to insert a false connection between Iraq and 9/11 into the 9/11 report, but the families and the staffers fought against him. He had two people testify. Abraham Sofair, who was the supposed first expert called to testify, he essentially made the case for the war in Iraq, and somebody by the name of Laurie Milroy, who she's not credible at all, and she also testified, and Lori Van Auken, one of the Jersey Girls, confronted Zelikow after Laurie Milroy testified, and I forget what she said, but it was essentially, how dare you? And he had a sly smile that crossed his face. It's been alleged that he may have taken direction from Karl Rove, who, according to Philip Sheenan, was concerned about the 9/11 commission because, quote, in the wrong hands, it could cost President Bush a second term, end quote. The allegation regarding Rove drove the September 11th advocates, or otherwise known as the Jersey Girls, to call for an entirely new investigation. This took place in February of 2008. No corporate media in the country covered their request. It was only Raw Story that covered that request at the time.
Right.
Now, one of the amazing things to come out of Phil Sheenan's book called The Commission is the fact that in early 2003, Philip Zelikow and Ernest May wrote a complete outline of the final 9/11 report before the investigation even began. Zelikow, Keene, and Hamilton decided to keep this outline a secret from the commission staffers. When, quote, it was later disclosed that Zelikow had prepared a detailed outline of the commission's final report at the very start of the investigation, many of the staff's investigators were alarmed, end quote. Can you imagine? I mean, they literally had everything planned out as to how they wanted it to go before they even started investigating it. That's how ridiculous it is.
It sounds, Larry, that sounds kind of what they did with the JFK, didn't they? The Warren Commission, they pretty much had the cover-up ready to go and guys there to sign off on it. I have a question, John, and we are actually getting some questions in through the chat, but let me go first. How the heck did Philip Zelikow get this position of power, and how was it granted? From whom was it granted to him?
I think that he was hired. Bob may know better than I. I think he was hired by Keene or Hamilton. They both...
Because they were the co-chairs of the commission, Keene and Hamilton, correct?
Yes, but I know that it was Karl Rove that essentially got Tom Keene into this. I don't know exactly who hired Philip Zelikow. I can't say that I do.
But it's amazing how they can control a whole cover-up like that and have one guy in there directing traffic. And that's the thing about the 9/11 Commission, you know, in the minds of the general public, they feel like the investigation was done, you know. They issued a report. But people like you and Bob and others who've been paying attention and the news reports that came out afterwards are able to say, hey, wait a minute, this report is a fraud. It's false. It's not what happened, and so that this needs further investigation. I do want to give the listener a chance to have her question answered. If I'm not mistaken, Colleen, Paul asked, what is being done now that a listener can get involved in? And I guess that could be directed to both you, John, and Bob McIlvaine. Here we are coming up on 13 years, and we're still pursuing justice here. And here's a listener that wants to know what he or she can do and how to get involved to help get there.
I can go first. Right, there's obviously the high-rise safety initiative, which Bob can talk about. But another effort that's underway is an effort to declassify the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, which talks about Saudi Arabian financial links to the attacks. Currently, Representatives Stephen Lynch and Walter Jones and Representative Massey and a 9/11 family member by the name of Terry Strada, and I'm sure many others, are trying to get these 28 redacted pages released so they can get Saudi Arabia into a courtroom, which is something I would love to see. I would love to see 9/11 in a courtroom, a real courtroom, where you have to provide evidence and question people, cross-examine people. That's what I want to see, one of the things I want to see. And so that's what they're doing. And honestly, I don't know where you could go other than Stephen Lynch's or Walter Jones's website to find out how you could help those families. But that's something, those 28 redacted pages, they've been trying, the families, the Jersey girls, they wrote a petition in 2006 that got 17,000 signatures for their release, and we never got them released. Obama promised both Kristen Brotweiser and Bill Doyle, two 9/11 family members, that he would release them, and he never has. So that's something that's being worked on.
And more people are waking up and wanting to get involved, and that's great. And that gives these politicians the courage to go out on a limb, which is political suicide, 9/11 and other things that used to be called third rails. But here we have I know Walter Jones, a Republican out of North Carolina, first picked it up, and then he was able to get Stephen Lynch, a Democrat out of Boston, to come together on it, and that's great when you can show that it's not a D or an R thing, and that opens it up for people to put aside their political party loyalties and go for the issue. And I want to commend both those representatives. And you mentioned now we have another one, Massey. That's the fellow's name, John?
That's his last name. I don't know his first name.
Yeah. So this is great. So what people can do is talk about it, get involved in it, and give these guys more of a safety net to do more. And it looks like it's doable. I hope that answered the question. Bob, did you have anything to add to that question? What is being done? What is being done now?
The most important thing, well, my advice to anyone, and it's my experience in dealing with people, because it's just no one likes to read, and you have to read history. I mean, it just solidifies my feeling about what's happened. You just can't blame it on 2-3 people. And it's like today, I don't know how many times, and you had mentioned it, Iran-Contra, the Iran-Iraq war, so many things that happened right around 1980, where millions of people die. And it just goes down the dustpan of history. And it leads up to this thing, we had with Lee Hamilton, with the Jersey girls. I went over to Lee Hamilton's office after the joint congressional hearings, and the Jersey girls had brought up in this meeting, it was the Jersey girls, and I was sitting in the back with this fellow from that September 11th Family for Peaceful Tomorrows, and they brought up their 28 redacted pages. And, of course, Lee Hamilton, he says, well, yep, you're absolutely right. We should have those pages brought out. They shouldn't be redacted. But then he said, if it was up to me, though, because of national security, I wouldn't allow it. Okay, they were exact words from Lee Hamilton immediately after the final joint congressional hearings. Well, if you go into history, and that's why it's so important for me to just solidify my feelings about everything, it's so important to read history. And you had mentioned the October surprise. That's 1980, where we have the revolution, the supposedly Khamenei takes over Iran, the devil of all devils, and then we're negotiating with him during the election of Carter, Reagan and Carter in November, and making deals with them to hold off the hostages until the election's over. And then immediately when Reagan was made president, the hostages were released. So Hamilton, along this way, the October surprise, he was part of the congressional hearings that stymied these. In the Iran-Contra, they had the hearings in the 90s. And he was one, because of that, he said these exact words, because of national security, we can't release this information. And then he's saying the same thing about 9/11, because of national security. Well, these people work for the same people. Kissinger, Brzezinski, it's the money of the world. They, we want to, if you look at the history, everything goes back to, specifically after World War II, where Alan Dulles said, this is not about communism. This is not about the war on communism. This is about controlling the natural resources of the world. And this is what people have to recognize. This is where you look at history. Everything we do is to break down any nation state in the world, and it's happening to every day, now, and forever. In the ruse of 9/11, and this is what has to be understood. You know, we're not humanitarians. We're not doing anything nice in Iraq right now. We're the ones that people, Bush and everyone else in that administration, they should be hanging, just like they hung Saddam Hussein. This was criminal. And who are the people that do these things? Well, if you read these, it permeates the whole world. The people with the sheiks throughout the Middle East, the bankers of London, the bankers of the United States, they're always making money. They just continue to make bunches of money. You know, going back to Smedley Butler when he said, war is a racket. That's what it's all about. And that's it, you know, for the good of the world, people have to look at 9/11. I don't want to make my son just the only victim. You know, we go back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and, you know, in the 70s, you had the generals, 30,000 leftists, because they did not follow the natural capitalistic freedom that we talk about. And the 30,000 leftists were thrown out of planes into the ocean because they were leftists. Well, this has happened from day one after World War II. Now we use it while we have these evil people in the Middle East. Well, this is what everyone wants. They want this strategy of tension. They want war because the rich people aren't getting. They don't lose anything. It's happening in Ferguson right now. It's a war of the people. You got to keep these people. You keep the people down. Keep them dumbed down. And the United States now is so dumbed down, it's pathetic. But this is all part of the whole program. You know, we have to get bigger in our thinking, and that's where studying history is so important, because it's just so difficult to just isolate 9/11 and say, I just can't believe George Bush or George Bush Sr. or Kissinger or Armitage or so many other people would do something like this. But they're nothing but, you know, they're the slugs that work for the money people of the world. Kissinger and Brzezinski, this is what they do. This is their job. That's why you have the Council of Foreign Relations. Does anybody look at what they do? They determine foreign policy. No one in this country has any determining factor in what happens in foreign policy. It's absolutely beyond anybody's comprehension, and they do anything they want. And it's all about making money and keeping nations downtrodden unless they completely conform to our idea of what freedom is, and that's exploitation of the money. And that's what, to me, so important. You have to look at your history. You have to read to really get a full understanding of what's happening. It's been happening since day one and back in '53 when we overthrew Iran. And you can see it right now. The same thing that happened then is still happening in Iraq, in Syria, Ukraine, everywhere. That's all it amounts to. And that's it in a nutshell. I think you can better understand 9/11 if you understand all that history.
Good point, Bob. Go ahead.
I love what Bob has to say. You know, I'm an avid reader of history. I mean, my God, I've looked so much into the Nazis because of what our government is doing and so forth, and I see so many parallels. But anyway, with regards to the idea that our government would never kill anyone or never put any American in harm's way, I mentioned over the break that I have a new show coming out called We Were Lied to About 9/11, and my first guest is Jenna Orkin. Our government knowingly and willingly put Americans in harm's way when they told the people of New York that the air was safe to breathe, that the water was safe to drink, and thousands have gotten sick. Well over 1,000 9/11 first responders have died because of this. And they knowingly told people that the air was safe to breathe and the water was safe to drink. And why did they do this? To reopen Wall Street. Because Bob was mentioning, you know, money is more important than people.
Yes, and I did want to add on to that, John. I'm glad you brought that up. There's a great organization, and you you and Bob know this firsthand, but the Feel Good Foundation, that's spelled FEAL, good, GOOD, Foundation. .com, I believe it is, and I know our local Vets for Peace chapter in Central Florida did a 2-day fundraiser for them on the 10th anniversary down here with the Orlando chapter of We Are Change, and we're going to do another fundraiser again this year on September 13th, an all-day event. But folks, there's been well over 1,000 first responders who have died from illnesses directly related to the poison dust that they were inhaling there, and that's a story that's not told too much, and I'm glad you brought it up. Larry, to tag on to that question we got from the chat room, we have the politicians, and as Bob and Jon described, they can only go so far, but you've seen change, and you've talked about what people can do in all your columns. You close with that: each one reach one, each one teach one, and you've been involved in the solution. And Larry, this is something we get from Larry from his columns and everything. Yes, we do a lot in identifying the problems and identifying the lies and bringing attention to them, but then where we got to also talk about remedying it, and that comes from the ground up, does it not, Larry?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the solution is why we are involved in this struggle. We're not involved in the struggle because it's fun. We're involved in the struggle to find viable solutions, And as, Bob and Jon were talking, as well as our first guest, Ted, we're all talking, the words of Joseph Goebbels came to my mind, and I want to repeat this. I want to repeat those words, and I want people to really think about what this guy said. He said, quote, "If you tell a big enough lie, you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state, i.e. the government, can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state, i.e. the government, to use all of its powers to repress dissent. Why? For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state, i.e. the government." So, in the quote. So, I mean, let's use our common sense. Let's, as the Chicanos would say, let's use our cabezas. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take Albert Einstein. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that the lie of 9/11 was remains a huge lie, a huge cover-up, from G.W. Bush right on up to Barack Obama and his henchmen. And it's not about Democrats or Republicans, because they're all Republicans drinking from the same filthy, disgusting trough. What this struggle is about is the people. And in this case, we're talking, and I'm talking about everyday, ordinary, black, white, brown, red, and yellow people. We have to pick up the mantle. We have to be the ones to stand up and say, you know what, whether you like it or not, you're going to follow our lead, Mr. or Ms. Politician, because we're leading. That's what this struggle's about. So I salute, Ted, Bob, all of our guests, for that matter, all three of you. I salute you. I salute all that you have done and that you are continuing to do. And it's vitally important that we shed light on this. I always go back and I think about, remember, you all remember this. I know you're as old as me, whether you want to admit it or not. You remember the Wizard of Oz? Come on. You know, it's time for us to pull this curtain back. Our sisters and brothers have died and are dying all over the world, not just here, but all over the world. This is based on a lie, a lie. So John and Bob and Ted, all three are fighting to pull back that curtain, to show the truth to the people, whether they like it or not, because they better learn to like it. We better learn to like it if we're going to carry on our existence, frankly, for humankind, for Mother Earth. And I just, you know, when I hear Bob, you know, Bob's been on our show before, and when I hear him speak, I just feel such rage and anger and pain. But at the same time, simultaneously, I feel such hope, because, Bob, your message is getting out there. People do hear you, as I'm sure you are cognizant. You know. And John, the same goes for you. You know, we're in this struggle together, and damn it, we're going to win this struggle together no matter how long it takes.
Amen. And guess what, guys? We do have a caller that's been holding on. Thank you, Larry. And you mentioned, John, I do want to, I think this quote from John's book is quite fitting to tag on to what you just shared, Larry. And this is from Jon Gold himself. Don't ever, and I mean ever, let anyone tell you that you wasted your time on this. It is and always was the right thing to do. And that's from our own Jon Gold. It looks like we do have a caller in the queue waiting patiently here, area code 707. And we have a question after that from the chat room. 707, are you with us?
Hey, Phil, it's Dale Pierce.
Oh, Dale Pierce. This is Dale Pierce, folks, who's also been on our show in the broadcast with Bob McIlvaine, where we entitled it 9/11 Kills, A Tale of Two Fathers. Dale, thank you for calling in, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, terrific to be here. Great venue. I'm really interested in working with John and Bob here. As you know, I'm doing some outreach to the firefighters community, and they're not really interested a whole lot in 911 or the technicals of it. So what we really need to do is use the family victims to tell their story and gain entry into their conscience that way, because going to firehouses, knocking on doors, they're not interested. They're heavily invested in the original story, because if we come through, it's a threat to their whole well-being of what they've set up. You know, what it is on September 11th, our racism caught up to us, and we needed a boogeyman, and we needed it quick, because 911 was hooked to our foreign policy, so we blamed it on the first one. It was convenient, and those long hairs in the desert worked out just perfect. So we shrugged all our responsibilities as professionals. As firefighters, we all knew that something was dreadfully wrong. Architects, engineers, they ran the other way, except for a few brave ones that we've had sign our petitions. So we've tried everything, and I finally hooked up with some marketeers that know what they're doing. And you've got to tell if you're going to sell something that's not popular, you gotta do the oldest technique possible, tell a story. So we need say a 15-year-old kid now that lost his father as a firefighter. That's how we're going to reach the Americans that are just simply invested in the original conspiracy. So after the show or tomorrow, I'd love to talk to some of you guys and see if we can't hook up. I know there's a whole bunch of them out there, and they should be at the perfect age. The firefighters community, their biggest threat is a firefighter with a cell phone hooked to Facebook. That could be a tragedy. Well, nothing could be worse than a firefighter's son who's asking technical questions, kind of like what Richard Gage asked on C-SPAN on the Washington Journal the other day on August 1st, if everyone's seen that. Yes. We just simply kept calling in with a simple question, how does a building fall at free fall speed, to the guests there, and the crowd, their viewers got into that question. And over the next year and a half, basically, the callers hijacked the show and kept asking the question, how does a building fall down at free fall speed? And so Washington Journal had to have us on. So we just got to keep up the pressure, and really we want to tell the story now of the victims' families. So that's what I have to say about this.
Well, thank you, Dale. And Dale knows firsthand from putting so much work into the effort to confront the firefighters this past, June, when they were having their convention on the ocean there in Maryland, down on the beaches, and it was called 911 Rekindled or something to that effect, and you know, there was a lot of hope with the effort. Dale put a lot into it, and it was supposedly we thought that the firefighters might be shamed, and they just ignored it. And that's what they've been doing all along. We've found that here in our work as far as approaching the local firehouses outside of New York City where we are. And they'll say, thank you for the information, be very polite, but they won't do anything about joining us in pursuit of 9/11 truth. I did want to ask Bob about
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I have something to say with that regard.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to the families, there are films, 9/11 Press for Truth. There's, in their own words, the untold stories of the 9/11 families. And with regards to the Jersey Girls, they have released press release after press release after press release since the release of the 9/11 report, calling into question a multitude of things in the corporate media. You know, they were media darlings during the 9/11 Commission. Then once the 9/11 report was released, suddenly they're, persona non grata. They don't want to know anything about them. And Lori Van Auken and Mindy Kleinberg, they released a report showing how poorly the 9/11 Commission answered their questions. There's a multitude of things that the families have given us, a multitude of tools that the families have given us over the years that could help us.
Yes, and that, I'm glad you mentioned Press for Truth, and that's based on Paul Thompson's work, and that's at the History Commons, the timeline that Paul Thompson originally set out to do. And the name of the film, folks, is 9/11 Press for Truth, and it's the story of the Jersey Girls and their fight against this. But I think what Dale was getting at is right now, where we are now, and the 9/11 family members. And I did want to present this to Bob McIlvaine, being a 9/11 family member, and then we do have a question from the chat. Could you try to address what Dale was offering there, Bob, as far as how the public the firefighters were not stirred by trying to be shamed? Will the public take notice of a scenario that Dale was suggesting, where you might have an orphan who's now a teenager questioning the official story? Hey, wait a minute, my dad was a firefighter killed in 9/11, and any firefighter knows that fires don't make steel frame buildings blow up into dust, or something to that effect, where he's without a dad. Are there any 9/11 families that are even interested anymore in getting involved, or have so many of them just decided to move on and with life? What's your take on the 9/11 families, Bob?
Well, my frustration is just mind-boggling. I just, I get to the point where I resent everyone. It's because of my anger, because everyone's dropped out, and it eats you alive. I mean, you can see I still have the raw emotion. It's still like yesterday, and that's exactly what people don't want. They want to just say, move on, and I don't blame them. Lori, has new friends, has to worry about her family. Of course, But I don't understand it. I just get so upset. It's so emotional for me. Like Dale said, like for me to go to like a fire company and start talking about 9/11, well, I get too upset. I get too emotional. And if people aren't listening, I remember I went to the Denver Libertarian Convention, and they had a 9/11 platform there they wanted to present. And I just got so angry out there because people just ignored it. They just ignored it. People just don't want to put their toes into the water, into the hot water, because they're afraid they're going to get burned. And I've seen examples, where people have decided to go into this. And, it's their families are almost destroyed. Their wife is so upset. Their kids are upset. So if you get involved in it, then suddenly you lose friendship. That's like John and I meet every Wednesday because we don't have anyone to talk to anymore. So I understand the frustration of Dale, but it's just that people don't want to make that effort. And as far as family members, I don't like being around them because no one wants to talk to me. Like, how you doing, Bob? What do you do? Well, I'm still doing research on 9/11. Well, then they walk away from me. They don't want to hear it. No one wants to hear it. My wife doesn't want to hear it. We'll go to a party. She begs me not to talk about 9/11. I agree with her. I never bring it up, but if someone wants to talk about it, then I'll accommodate them. So I don't know what, my forum is to be able to go on a show like this, or, last year when I did the International Travel Town where I talked to 120 million people in 70 countries. That's my forum because I just can do my thing. And I don't have to get angry. I still have tremendous anger, and I still have tremendous sadness. And when I'm in a small group and someone, comes after me saying, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist, well, I just can't be indifferent to that. I'll end up getting in a fight. Now, with my wife, I'm close to getting in fights with people. They'll say, well, you're crazy. Well, that's all someone has to do to me. And then I just get upset. And I can't do that. I really have to avoid it. Yeah. But every once in a while, out of the clear blue sky, someone might mention 9/11 because they want to know. But no one wants to know because they're afraid. They really are afraid because it'll change the whole structure of their life. And I've seen it. People have called me and they said, well, I'm glad I've done it, but you can't believe how it's changed my life. I left work, or I've been fired, or whatever. And then they lose their friends. So it's tough. It really is tough. And that's because family members just moving on. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Let me say something very quickly to you, my brother. Both Bob and John. Bob, the next time somebody looks at you and calls you a conspiracy theorist or says you're crazy, this is what I suggest that you do. You look them dead in their eyes, smile, and say, the world is flat, and wink. And go on about your business.
Oh boy,
you're actually right, Larry. I'll work on that. I really will. But it's very upsetting to me because you're right, absolutely right, and I will try that.
But you're not alone.
Hey, what's going on here?
We got another call. Please, quickly. Who's trying to speak in?
I was at the AIA convention at the American Institute of Architects.
Yes.
And getting on the bus, some architects saw the Rethink 911, and they gave me some real bad compliments on it. So I called them out on their ethics, and then the whole bus kind of turned against me because they know, and they just wanted to go away. And I said, look, folks, if you think this is uncomfortable with me asking you about your buildings that fell on my firefighters, how are you going to feel next year when we have some veterans missing arms and legs and the bus has to accommodate their wheelchair? And you could hear a pin drop on that bus. So the tide is turning, and we have got a meeting with the president of the AIA through the Architects and Engineers. So it's turning, but you've got to apply a little heat to their heels. So
stay on it. Thank you, Dale. And I'll speak with John and Bob after the program and see if you guys can exchange information. We'll do that off air. We do have another caller, but I do want to say this, to put it on these firefighters and the victims' family members and all that, it doesn't have to be on them, and maybe it shouldn't. And there are a heck of a lot of good people that are moved by this, that do believe in justice and working for it, like Jon Gold. But there's also everyday people that may not be able to do the things that Jon does, or Larry and I do. But you can do something. And I do want to acknowledge this fella on Facebook. This guy Claudio has started this campaign with the Facebook profile pictures called IamTheFaceOfTruth.com. And here's a fella who took the initiative to create this, and then ordinary people can just agree to say, yeah, put that label on my Facebook picture. I'm down for that. You can do that. You can do something. And this thing's really taken off. So I did want to acknowledge that. We do have about 5 minutes left in the program, and we have a caller from the 313 area code. Caller?
Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to say to Bob that I feel his pain, and that when you go to anybody about anything that is, it could be about health, it could be about politics, it could be about education, it could be about anything, and there's a 700-pound gorilla in the room, and nobody wants to talk about it. And, I understand how that works, and just in everyday situations, it's probably a good idea to wake somebody up. I see that there's a lot of people that are really sick in this country, and you make a little, a suggestion to them, hey, you better stop doing this, and they look at you, and you get right back to that Arthur Schlappinger thing, where all truth goes through 3 stages. First it's, ridicule, then opposition, and then acceptance. In our daily life, every day, we have to bring people out of their paradigm and out of their procedure and help them look at the truth of what's happening right then and there around them. And then eventually they'll pick up on history and, how history is written by the victors. And, it's pretty cut and dry. You have to hit everybody all the time. You just have to say, hey, wake up, because we are our brother's keepers. If people are asleep, whether we know them or not, we have to wake them up. But I feel Bob's pain.
And there are many, many people out there that continue to wake up because of everyday folks like ourselves, handing out a DVD here, or just making small talk in the checkout line at the grocery, or a bumper sticker on the car, or a T-shirt, or just little bits, throwing a flyer in the return envelope of junk mail, throwing a 9/11 truth flyer in there. Yeah, anything like this. Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I have found out through the years, I've been waking people up a long time, is that when I know I got somebody, when they look at me and they say, doesn't matter what the context is or what it is, it could be about how to cut a tree or, how to sew your sock up. It's when they look at you and they say, wow, I can't believe I noticed that. And that's when you know you got them. And you can do it with everybody. There's a lot. Most everything we've been taught for the last couple of 100 years is 180 degrees out. It's backwards. And it's hard to wake up, and you need help from people around you to wake up about anything, be it 911 or, the fact that sugar is poison or, whatever it is, that chemtrails are real and, look, they lied to us, Yeah, they did. They've been lying to us for centuries. It goes back to the time of the Romans. You just have to find one person at a time and wake them up. I think that's what we can do, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And we do have just a couple minutes left, and there is another caller in the queue. I'd like to switch over to him if possible. Him or her. Thank you, Paul. Area code 727. Are you with us? Do we just have a couple minutes?
Yeah, sure am, Phil. I just want to say that I applaud all you guys for your hard work, and and I want this message to go out to Mr. McIlvaine. I want him to know that I am behind him, and no matter what, I will not stop waking people up. I owe it to him. I owe it to my grandkids. I owe it to you, Phil. I owe it to Larry, Jon Gold, all the work he's done. I think we owe it to the world to try to make a difference. You know, when we start arguing between ourselves about what happened on 9/11, we hurt the movement. We need to stick to the plan. That the story they gave us did not add up.
Amen to that. Well,
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. And that's what our own Bob Bowman used to say, you know, the truth about 9/11 is we don't know the truth about 9/11, and we damn well need to know with all the people getting killed and harmed by it. All we need to know is that, all we need to explain is that the official story doesn't add up, and we need to get to the truth. And it looks like we're going to have to wrap up the program here. I'm so sorry about that. I would love to talk more with our guests. We want to thank Ted Walter, who was on earlier with us, and that's the High Rise Safety Initiative, highriseSafetyNYC.org. Bob McIlvaine, 9/11 family member, and Bob, is there any quickly any website that you'd like to direct our listeners to?
No, just the High Rise Safety Initiative.
That's where folks can help
main
out.
Thing now, yeah, it's a big thing. It really is a big thing.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for your work with that. Jon Gold, you've got a new radio program coming up and a book that you've written. Quick notes to our listeners as to what they can do to find you.
You can find me at Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox, or I highly recommend historycommons.org and their complete 9/11 timeline.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And of course, Larry Pinkney, our co-host, has a 40-some-odd years of work on his website, which is what, Larry, your website?
Well, it's Black Activist WG, Black Activist Writers Guild, blackactivistwg.org, and be sure to read Intrepid Report. I just want to thank everyone, including JP, for a great job. Thank you, John. Thank you, Bob. Stay strong. All right? Remember the Carpenter song, We've Only Just Begun.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.